day 4. I don't even know how many events we've done thus far, but I know it's, I think, our 4th one today or 3rd. This is actually the last in-person one that the Carlson Center will be leading here in the space today. So we're excited to finish with an awesome discussion. But for those of you that don't know, my name is Cameron Law. I serve as the Executive Director here at the Carlson Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. We're excited to have you in our space. And we've been stewarding Global Entrepreneurship Week. And we're actually joining over 200 countries around the globe and celebrating the role entrepreneurship plays in our community by creating jobs, opportunity, and building prosperous communities from there. And so we wouldn't be able to do this week without some amazing sponsors. So back in 2018, we got the support from Western Health Advantage to endow this week to ensure that all students and our community would be able to celebrate Global Entrepreneurship Week. And so let's give it up for Western Health Advantage for their support as our title sponsor. And we wouldn't be able to do without our amazing angel sponsors, which we have Sandhill Global Advisors and SMUD, and we have SMUD represented on the panel here with Rachel. So let's give it up for both of them. And if you want to learn more about some of the amazing resources SMUD has, they do have a table over there. They have a seed program. So if you're building a business and want to engage SMUD as a potential customer, they have a great program called Seed, and I highly recommend checking that out. Additionally, we have our startup sponsor, which is 5 Star Bank, and then some of our idea sponsors, Golden One Credit Union, City of Roseville, and the College of Continuing Education. So let's give it up for those final sponsors. And so with that, wanted to turn it over to Orville Thomas, the CEO of the California Mobility Center, who will be moderating our panel today. I'm really excited to talk about the future of the zero-emission vehicle industry, and particularly its role, at Sac State and how we're going to be engaging in that ecosystem from there. So I'll turn it over to Orville in the awesome panel that we have here. So thank you all. You'll share this.
Thanks, Cameron. And thank you all. And thanks to those that are streaming in online via Facebook and LinkedIn. It's really exciting to be part of Global Entrepreneurial Week at Sac State. It's my first time kind of visiting the Carlson Center twice this week. So thank you guys for welcoming us. As Cameron mentioned, I'm Orville Thomas. I'm the new CEO of the California Mobility Center. It is designed to be a clean energy, power, and zero-emission innovation hub that currently has a 25,000 square foot facility just right down the road, Florham Perkins and Fruit Ridge. But the exciting part is that we are aiming to build a $300 million extension of the campus to provide those same services and research development, prototyping, also manufacturing for students at Sac State and partners like some of the ones that we have on our panel. So I will let everyone introduce themselves right now, and then we will get into the kind of fun conversation. And if you have questions during the conversation, let's make this a little bit more interactive. Feel free to raise your hand and I'll call you out, and then we can have a larger dialogue. So first up, I will kind of introduce Nate Baggio.
Hello, everybody. I'm Nate Baggio. I'm the Senior Vice President of Commercial Development with the Lion Electric Company. We are a manufacturer of medium and heavy duty electric vehicles, and that's all we do. We are fully committed to this. We just opened the largest medium and heavy duty manufacturing facility in the United States in Joliet, Illinois, and have been moving this forward since 2014, and even delivered the first modern lithium-ion school bus, one in Massachusetts, but also here in Sacramento. So, and also maybe a fun fact, or maybe a stark warning, I started in transportation as a Sac State student and got a job driving a school bus in Del Paso Heights because the company had a tuition reimbursement program. But that was 33 years ago, and now I'm helped lead medium and heavy duty electrification across the United States and Canada.
Well, you really definitely come full circle. That's fantastic. I love that. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Rachel Wong. I'm the Director of Customer and Grid Strategy at SMUD. So we recognize that customers can definitely be part of our solution. SMUD has a very aggressive goal of reaching 0 carbon emissions by 2030, and we recognize that transportation, being the largest emitter of greenhouse gases, is a key area for us to focus on to decarbonize, and is an opportunity for the utilities as well as we think about integrating more renewables. EVs and the batteries in those EVs have a huge opportunity to help contribute to that. So very excited to be here with all of you today.
Thanks, Rachel. Good afternoon. My name is Kayvon Shafazada.
I'm the Dean of the College of Engineering and Computer Science here at Sacramento State. I'm a civil engineer by trade, but as Dean, part of my job is to connect our faculty, our students, even our staff with industry partners such as those on this panel. And part of my job is to help guide the college toward the future of what industry is expecting of our graduates. So we are always conscious of the state of the practice and the state of the art in industry so that we can better prepare our students for those future demands.
I'll do a kind of warm-up question, I guess, for everybody, especially as we are in the midst of entrepreneurs. When we talk about innovation, especially in the zero emission sector and clean energy sector, how does that resonate with you and your work right now and into the future?
I'm holding the mic, so I guess I'll start.
Hot mic right there, you got it.
Well, like I said, at the university, we're always looking to stay current with what's happening in industry. And we have Sacramento State is an anchor institution where we serve the community, but I'm proud to be on the stage with anchor partners within the community where together we're working on building the pipeline of students coming into STEM fields. Once they get here, we take care of them, we educate them, and then we get them jobs into industry in these fields and in these emerging markets and sectors. And so you wouldn't think about it, but educators must be entrepreneurial by nature. I tell all our faculty, some of whom are here today, that you are essentially your own small business where you must part of your business is teaching, part of your business is research, and part of your business is service. And all of those things are in collaboration with industry and the community. And so we're really here to serve our students and make that connection to you all in industry. And the partnership with the California Mobility Center is a perfect example, and our partnership with SMUD is that perfect example. And Nate, we'll talk after. So yeah, thanks.
Well, as I mentioned, SMUD has a very aggressive goal of achieving zero carbon emissions by 2030. And when we mapped out our plan, we actually recognized that with existing technology that's out there and kind of looking at projections of what's to come, there was probably about 10% of the plan that we actually didn't know exactly how to achieve. And really, that's the opportunity for innovation. Now, granted, there's opportunity for innovation throughout the entire 100%, but that last 10%, innovation is critical. And it's not just the technology innovation, it's also the policy innovation. It's the business model innovation. So, as we think about our goals, the key things with regards to zero carbon emissions by 2030, we're not just getting the technical aspects of it all right, but it was to do it by keeping world-class reliability, by maintaining rates at or below inflation. So we can't spend a boatload to make sure that we do there. And then also making sure that we bring our communities, all of our communities along, that all of our customers can actually participate. And that's really critical. And to achieve those three pillars, we need innovation in all of those spaces in order to be able to achieve that in a way that's very cost effective and that everybody can be engaged and be part of the solution. So we have always had a history of leaning in. SMUD has liked that. We have a very great dedicated R&D team, but we recognize that we need innovation in all of those spaces to be able to achieve what we're trying to accomplish.
Lion Electric started as, an entrepreneurial venture. Our CEO, back when there were 0 lithium-ion heavy-duty vehicles on the road, decided that's where things were going. And when I first met our CEO, I was working in, the bus business, but not working for Lion yet. And he's like, we have these electric buses. We're reimagining the iconic yellow school bus. And I hope he's not watching online, but I remember thinking, this guy's nuts. It was such a significant change. It was such a courageous move as an entrepreneur to change really history, the way we move people and goods in a very significant way. But he stayed with it. He had done his research. He had conviction. And now we've gone public. He's built up a company that has 2 major factories in North America. And we're pushing this industry. But as entrepreneurs and as you look at ways to become a part of this industry, and again, I'm a manufacturer, when we started building these, all of the electric components were for diesel trucks. So they were not efficient from an electric standpoint. We were piecing together things because there were entire industries and markets that just did not exist to support EV. And I'm talking about componentry, but I'm also talking about software. I'm also talking about battery development. This is such a young industry. There's a lot of talk about it, but there are so many opportunities that have to happen. Entrepreneurs have to step up and develop the next generation of what's happening. Lithium-ion batteries, the current chemistry is only going to give us about 20%, 25% more range, which doesn't get it done for all duty cycles or for utilities. They need more energy to draw from. So it is entrepreneurs that are going to need to come up with that new chemistry, to come up with new efficiencies, new componentry. And again, we're just getting started. It is big now, but we are just getting started with this. And this industry in particular, the opportunities are really endless at this point.
Nate, really quick, when was that first Lion bus out on the street, and what was the range that you guys had?
The first bus we deployed was through a grant, and it was in Massachusetts for a school district that didn't own a school bus and didn't want one. So I'm not sure how that came to fruition, but we gave them this new technology that went 60 miles, and it cost about $600,000. And the bus is actually still in service today, and that was back in 2015. So you can see where we are now, where we're up to 180 miles of range, and we've just about cut the price of these vehicles in half. So the momentum in a very short period of time is moving quickly. And as I said before, we're just getting started. This is still a very young industry.
And we'll stick with you. And we have a room full of, people that are interested in innovation, entrepreneurship. Where are all three of you identifying the biggest threats and barriers to your immediate future? And how do you see the innovation cycle starting to address that? Or how are you moving to conquer it?
I would say the biggest barriers we have right now are speed and volume certainty. These vehicles are expensive. We all know that, right? But the only way to get that price down is to get volume certainty and speed. And there's a very generous federal grant that's paying for electric school buses and trucks coming up this year. But just the culture and mindset of how these programs work, you don't see the cash to the customer that can buy the vehicle for 2 to 3 years. And EV companies are starting to, get unsure about this stuff. There was a major company, Proterra, that was the gold standard that declared bankruptcy and now is being bought off by Volvo and Phoenix Motor Systems. So it's, I think we have to change our mindset on speed. And also what ties into speed is we're looking at these technologies that are so far away. A school bus is perfect. An Amazon delivery truck, this all happens now. There's an economic case for those to be on the road, delivering packages, delivering freight, coming out of the port to a distribution center. The TCO is there today, right now. And we need to move quickly on what works now before we move on to the aspirational goals of what's the next thing and really get those out, because the percentage of those that are on the road is still very small. So I would say that's probably one of the biggest areas of concern, but also opportunity, is volume certainty and the speed at which we're accustomed to moving for these types of programs.
I'll actually kind of follow on a little bit. That theme of speed, but the volume certainty piece, I think from a utility perspective, the key thing that we're really focused on is how do we make efficient investments in the grid to be proactive to support the growth of this transition. We recognize both from a policy perspective as well as a urgency of decarbonization perspective that the acceleration of adoption is going to be critical, and that charging infrastructure needs to be there in order to help drive that adoption. The challenge is the certainty of where are they going, what do they need, what infrastructure is there right now, And how do I think about the investment that I need to make in that infrastructure ahead with enough lead time relative to making sure we're meeting the needs of entities like Lion or the schools that will be procuring them. So some of it is data, right? How much information can I get ahead of time of, hey, I'm a school and I'm thinking about electrifying my school bus, or I am a region and I am thinking about electrifying in this area, or where are consumers thinking about buying an EV even before they bought the EV? If they bought the EV, drove it off the lot and are ready to charge, they want quick turnaround. They want to put in their charging and go. But if we have electrical infrastructure that we need to invest in there, that could make some delays, and we don't want to impact the customer experience. So things that we think about are, how can we get that information early? How do we triangulate to better understand maybe there's multiple needs? One of the things that we recently did was the California Energy Commission sponsored. They basically gave us a grant for medium and heavy duty blueprint. So we actually surveyed 100 commercial fleets to understand what were their plans relative to electrification, where were they located, and therefore, where would we see pockets within our service territory in West Sacramento of where charging infrastructure would be needed so that we could be much more targeted with regards to the grid investments that we make. And then what also do we need to do with the end use customer, whether it's a school or a consumer, on how they drive and what their charging behavior is? Because if we're able to think about how they manage, if they're able to change their charging behaviors relative to price signals or adoption of increased renewables, then there may be opportunities for us to better optimize what infrastructure needs to go in there, as well as maximize the amount of renewable energy that can be utilized to fuel those vehicles.
From an education perspective, the threats to this industry are sort of twofold. I think about us. I mean, we have 30,000 students, a couple hundred faculty and staff, and our demographics represent both the greater community as well as our university population. And there are two things that make me think of both on the consumer side, making sure that the general public is aware of all of these opportunities. In order for SMUD and Lion and the California Mobility Center to be successful, consumers have to know about the opportunities that are out there and have to be willing to make some educated consumer choices. The switch from gas to electric or from internal combustion engine to an electric vehicle, for example, requires some public education. That's one component. The other component too is that our students now are going to be the future employees and leaders of this movement. And so we have an obligation as a university to make sure that our students are prepared to think critically and think entrepreneurially, is that a word? To be prepared to step into this space. And so as an anchor university, partnering to educate the community is one component, but educating our students and our graduates so that they're prepared to fill in and serve the employers that are in this space is the other component. And if we're not attacking or addressing both of those issues, it's a potential threat to this industry.
Just really quickly with the audience, how many people have ridden an EV or a zero emission vehicle? I think we're getting close to almost like 100%. How many people own a zero emission vehicle? How many people? Oh, thanks. That's it. I can't even say that yet. It's expensive. Next cars. How many people think their next car will be zero emission? So I think we know generally where the industry is heading, especially on the transportation side, decarbonization, zero emission. How many people have seen large scale battery backups for utilities? How many people think that there will have a power wall or something like that in their home into the future? So I think we now know where the utility side is going too, right? But there is now a gap that we know, especially on connecting energy to locations. What do we think in the next 5 years? And I'm saying that specifically because the 2030 carbon-free guidelines there. What is that next innovation that you need? Not like scales, not numbers, but what is that innovation that people here could be working on or trying to partner with into the future that we think is going to make like mass adoption of zero emission vehicles and decarbonizing houses kind of easier to do and for cheaper? Rachel, you can go first.
Okay, I can start. I think the first part is actually not having to do the grid infrastructure upgrade at all. So what are the opportunities for innovation in order to actually avoid needing to do that infrastructure? We actually know from a building decarbonization standpoint, because we are an air conditioning heavy load, summer load, that's mostly the contributor to peak. So, heating, not till like post 2045, 2050, cooking and water heating are not really going to add to peak. So buildings were probably okay. EVs can impact peak if they're charging on peak. Can you avoid charging on peak? Well, people who have homes and can put in charging at home, yeah, they probably, SMUD has a discount rate between midnight and 6 a.m. Whole house, 1.5 cents discount. Can you charge away from peak? Can you charge when the grid, when there's plenty of energy available, the grid capacity is available? Yes. Can you look at circuit splitters? There's on the market today, there's something you can share with your dryer, right? But those are things that are available today, but really it's a combination of the technology and the education, as you mentioned, because these are a lot of the things that we need to do from an innovation standpoint is actually changing the paradigm, right? Changing the gas station paradigm, changing the customer fueling paradigm, changing how they use energy behavior paradigm. So I think those are those types of things. First is, how do we avoid doing grid infrastructure upgrade? Then the second one is, how do we manage their energy use to optimize for reducing costs for the customer, reducing costs for the utility, maximizing renewable energy usage, so therefore we've got zero emissions and decarbonization. And we can do that through a lot of software technologies. That's managed EV charging, that's in the future, vehicle to grid, and being able to optimize that. But even on the customer behavior side, you think about the data analytics, and we talk a lot about AI. How do you predict customer behavior? How do you predict customer charging behavior? There's probably data available about all of us, that could be really very pinpointed, that can really help drive more certainty in when things will happen, which then helps us better plan accordingly. I think it's those types of areas. And then ultimately, yes, we do have to put in some grid infrastructure. But as I mentioned, that study that we did for the CEC, we identified, okay, well, where most likely would that grid infrastructure need to be put in regardless, because multiple commercial fleets are going to be electrifying in that area. And starting there to be much more pinpointed and focused, that enables us to reduce those costs and make sure we're optimizing the investments that we're making as a utility.
Well, I think first and foremost, what would really ramp up electric vehicle adoption is if we eliminated student debt. Once people graduate, one of their first purchases is a car to get around to their new job or to start their new business. So I think that would be a key thing to jumpstart that. And I'm certainly not saying that because I'm sitting here at Sac State University, but I truly believe that. The other part of this is really a lot of this is education. And I know that seems like a simple thing, but there are still people that think that, the average person will drive in a day, even if you take the busy salesperson that's driving around all these locations to somebody that just goes to work and back, you're really looking at average people doing fewer than 40 miles a day. And a lot of us, it's even a lot less than that. So understanding your behaviors and understanding the fact that range anxiety really shouldn't be a thing. It is, you can get in your car, you can do what you need to do. There's charging all over the place, especially here in California, and it's changing. I rented a car in Texas and it was a Tesla and there was charging up and down the freeway. So all those fears, we really need to get a balanced view. I think the other part of it is we need to get EV vehicles leaning more towards cars that everybody will buy and less in the luxury market, and making sure that cars for people that just need to commute and get back and forth, that we continue to develop those. Understanding what your current property can handle, and even apartment complexes. We were talking, I bought my house from somebody that had an electric dryer, so it was easy for me in the garage. So it was very easy, and I can program my car to charge at those times. But I think apartment complexes and having software solutions that everybody can go plug in, and then everybody knows they're going to charge at some point during the night. So when they wake up, they can go to school, they can go to work, they can go to the grocery store, wherever they're going to go. I think it's really just communicating those behaviors, what's possible with EV to alleviate some of that fear. I think from a very high level, I think we also need to understand that this transition to EV, it's a national security issue. This is good for all of us, no matter where you live in the United States, to have local control over who you're buying fuel from. It's good for the taxpayer. It's good for, like I said, national security. But it also brings things in more domestically, where we are going to have control, and those ups and downs in diesel fuel price or petroleum, depending on what's happening in different parts of the world, a lot of that can be alleviated by bringing things in locally. If you don't like the price of what's fueling your vehicle, then you drive down the street and talk to SMUD, rather than it being on the other side of the planet. So there's a lot of benefits for society and also individuals to move this faster. And we need to talk more about that.
This whole conversation is wonderful, and it makes me laugh a little bit, because I remember I'm having a flashback right now of a panel I was on probably 20 years ago, when I was asked with other experts, what do you think the future of transportation is going to look like? I said, I think it's going to look a lot like it looks now. And that's proven to be true. The difference is that we're trying to be better in terms of how people are mobilizing. And what I mean by that is that people still want the freedom to go from point A to point B on their own accord, and they don't want to worry about, the range of their vehicle. We're trying to do what we can to educate the public, to let them know that, hey, 90% of your trips, 95%, maybe even 99% of your trips, you won't have to worry about the range of the vehicle. And at the same time, we're working on the technology to improve the ranges of those vehicles. But what holds true today in 2023, as it did in 2003, as it probably will in 2043, is that people want the flexibility to live their life and mobilize and go from point A to point B at the time and on the day that they want to do that. And so we really have to find out where the consumer is and try to meet that demand. But part of it is education. Most consumers don't realize that they don't need a vehicle to travel to Tahoe every day, or to travel, out of the region. So it's important that we focus on those. And I think about like bicycles. And I mean, the transition to zero emission vehicles has already begun, and it started with the first zero emission vehicle, the bicycle. And we're seeing a lot more electric scooters and a lot more electric bicycles. When I park my bicycle in the bike compound on this campus, I'm surprised as how few of them actually are manually powered still. A lot of them are battery powered. So we're making that transition, and we will slowly, hopefully more quickly, make that transition to larger vehicles and heavy duty vehicles to satisfy our consumer demands.
It's interesting, because I think what the three of you are saying, that especially our entrepreneurs and future innovators are thinking through, is a reprogramming. We have been a society, especially in the United States, especially in California, where the car was the symbol of freedom. You get in, you go wherever you want. You just take a drive to take a drive, right? Like, not realizing how much privilege that is comparative to, everyone else that has kind of revolved around transport. And so as innovators, I think what students will have to think through is, how do you re-educate? How do you reprogram? How do you re-incentivize smaller trips, or not having to own cars. And I think that's what made Uber so great when it came out like a decade ago, right? It was, okay, I could just get in a car and go wherever and I'll pay the fee, but it's fine. And is what is the holy grail of transit, as getting people to realize that you could take a bus or a transit line. If it's reliable, then it'll get you there. What we're trying to do now is how do we, I think for those in the room, break 50 years of what we've always been doing and do it in a short period of time. And so for, I think, the students here is like, what advice can you give them as people that have worked in this industry of how do you change hearts and minds? What has kind of been successful? What is not successful? Because you three are front-facing spokespeople. And so you're probably also hearing it's never going to happen from a lot of people. Probably in 20 years, they probably thought it was like flying cars coming back at that point. And now they're so disappointed to realize it's just better vehicles. So how do you help change hearts and minds and use that as the basis for a innovation?
Yeah, I mean, being at a university, I'm privileged to interact with students who see the future before we see it. You talk to students and they have no problem hopping into an Uber or a Lyft or riding an electric scooter, or doing some of these things that some of our generation or our parents' generation have a hard time doing, right? So that change is happening. And so some of the cultural changes, whether it be with technology or inclusion or opening minds to different political perspectives. This is part of what makes a university so great, and why I feel blessed to work at a university like this. We interact with students who are dictating to us what the future consumers are going to want and demand. And if we can, and this is part of the reason why businesses are smart to engage with students at an early age, or consumers at an early age, because if they can make that transition early, then they've got a consumer for life. And so getting students and younger generations into the EV market is going to lead to a future of EV consumers.
So, before I started working in the utility industry, I actually worked in consumer product development for Procter & Gamble. And one of the things we often talked about is what is the product that will replace the product that currently exists. Now, a lot of you have always heard it wasn't about making a faster horse, it was making a car. And I won't tell you because I worked in toilet paper, actually, what the replacement of that was. But my point is one of the key things that we talked about is what is the unmet customer need? What is the unmet consumer need? And we've talked about, I've mentioned paradigm shifts and things like that. But ultimately, as you mentioned, the customer needs that freedom and convenience. But could it be met a different way? And so as I think about, yes, we do need to think about how customers use their energy and what time they use their energy and how much they use. But I'm not trying to change their behavior. If that's not aligned to their lifestyle or their value proposition, I need to figure out how to make it easy for them to be able to adjust if that makes sense for them. And so to your point about Uber, before the pandemic, I was like, okay, well, with autonomous vehicles in the future and, ride share, maybe people won't own their vehicles anymore. Maybe it might not be just what we consider traditional public transportation, but it will be shared transportation. And then the pandemic happened and that's kind of slowed things down. But I think I would challenge all of you to think that way, which is the consumer wants to live a lifestyle, but it doesn't necessarily have to be met exactly the way it is today. What would be the different angle that you would take to solve that problem or provide that experience that is not the same paradigm that they have, but ultimately still meets that outcome and need that they have?
Yeah, if I could just add on to that, I would say recognize the true genius that you have that someone of my generation doesn't have. I mean, growing up, getting in a car, wearing a seatbelt was optional when I was a kid. Maybe you wore one and they were only across your lap then anyway. And my mom was satisfied to just do this if there was a problem. But it's or I was facing the wrong way in the back of a station wagon and it didn't matter. So or riding in the back of a pickup truck. But so my point is that I have grown up in a world of fossil fuels. I have grown up in a world of certain boundaries and rules, and my reflexes are not your reflexes, because, and it's not a cop-out. I'm a big advocate of breaking everything and figuring out how to do it differently. And I try to be aware of that, but it's harder for me than it is for students here. So you don't have the baggage I have when it comes to looking at doing things differently and, or just accepting how things have always been done. And I think the flip side of that is the rest of us need to be receptive to that. When somebody brings an idea forward that doesn't fit within the boundaries that we've lived with for the past, 40 or 50 years. There has to be kind of a meeting in the middle of bringing experience together with innovation, and the innovation is really coming from you.
Question?
Yeah, question for Rachel, since you're talking about, like nudging consumer behavior instead of like brute forcing them to change their behavior. Have y'all considered working with EV vehicle manufacturers, EV manufacturers, to have a little pop-up that comes up on the console? Like, let's say if you plug in your Tesla at 2 p.m., it would say like, oh, delay charging until 8 p.m. to avoid, peak electricity pricing. And then that way there's like a reminder in the vehicle. And then there's also a value benefit for the consumer in that too.
Yeah, that's actually, a great point and great idea. We recognize, I think, in the EV space that we need to work with all the players in the ecosystem, specifically about when to charge. We've got how do we work with dealerships so that when people buy their vehicle, they can actually program their vehicle from the get-go about like, okay, you are with this utility, they've got these specific rates, and how do I program my car before I drive off the lot to take advantage of those things. We also have managed charging programs where we've worked with the auto OEMs. Specifically right now, we've got BMW, Ford, and Honda, I think, maybe General Motors as well, in partnership to be able to actually, they've got apps, they've got vehicles. And then as we move into the B2G world, there's lots of software providers. So to the point of innovation and ecosystems, lots of, they call them aggregators with regards to not just on your EV, but your battery storage at home and your thermostat. Like, how do we communicate to customers through what channels, whether it's in the EV or in a phone app, to be able to prompt them with whether it's economic signals or even climate signals, right? Which is, if you charge now, charge now. There's a lot of excess solar generation right now. You can take advantage of charging with zero emissions now versus charging from 5 to 8 p.m. So yes, definitely all of those things, and continuing to enhance that to make it very easy for them to be able to take advantage of that.
If I could just add on to that, one of the things we're doing, to your point, is we've developed a dashboard for the customers, because we manufacture, we sell the vehicle, and then we look to how we're going to sell the next one. But one of the things that our customers need to understand is, let's just say a school district here in Sacramento, you'll now get a dashboard that says you have removed so many tons of greenhouse gas emissions to date with this particular vehicle, this specific vehicle. You've also saved X amount of dollars by buying your fuel from SMUD as opposed to a gas station. So it will, over the life of the vehicle, they will see the benefit, not just from doing the right thing, but the economic benefit. We can spend money on other things like school bus driver wages or teachers or whatever it is the school district needs, instead of spending it on, diesel fuel and all of the parts that come along with those types of things. So we're really trying to give them a running total and reinforce why it was a good idea that they did this. So they have justification to buy more and truly embrace the change you're talking about.
Ron, did you have anything? I think to your point and to what Rachel and Nate have said, one of the areas for like kind of an easy entrance of innovation is data. The state does a really good job with open data portals. And what we are seeing is, companies come in and monetize data. So they want to know what time you're charging. They want to know how many miles you're driving, where you're driving. And utilities want to know that more than anybody because they have to plan for, chargers on different corridors, and they want to know like how many miles your school bus is driving, when it's on, when it's off, when it might be able to charge back, when it might be able to give money back or give energy back to the grid. So I think what we've seen kind of in this ecosystem is a really big rush to follow the manufacturers and to follow the vehicles being on the road with how can we be consultants, or how can we create an app that saves them from paying for 4 service members or consultants to give them the best total cost reduction, right? Like this, so that they can know if you charge at 8 p.m. versus 12 a.m. versus like 5 p.m., what those differences are, because every penny counts, as all of us know in this like industry. Question?
I just want to play the devil advocate here. That it's true that there have been a lot of progress and it's easy to create a rosy picture, but the latest data that I read regarding percentage of electric car that has been sold in the US was 2%. And this is not comparable in any sense in Europe, in Asia. I was in Norway last year, and they have like over 60% electric car. So it's just we're nowhere near where even to compare to the less developed countries, not alone Norway, etc. So that's one thing. The other thing, back to what you said, and Risha responded. Last summer I bought my first electric car, and that perhaps was the best $40,000 I spent in my entire life. Not just because of environment, it's just the experience of driving car. It's otherworldly. So if you have that, it's just worth every penny of it. And I tried to enroll in that incentive. And when I read the fine print and the amount of data that I am releasing to Smart to collect, it's just I thought I'm basically waiving my entire privacy. Every single location you go, they collect it. Not just charging. Everywhere you drive, you're giving permission. I didn't know. That fine print is so scary.
Which I talked to you about cell phones.
Yeah.
We are largely in a phase where everything in our house is digitized and monetized, whether it's our Nest like thermostats that obviously are selling data back to who bought it, Google, as to when you turn it up and when you turn it down based on like, are you home or not home? And then they sell it to like advertisers to like target when's the best time to sell you something. For the first question or point that you brought up, yeah, it's hard, as Nate talked about. Medium heavy duty zero emission trucks are less than 1% of the total truck population in California. But we live in this world of California as the 4th largest economy, as the like driver of like change around the world. Of the mandates are there. 2035, there will be no more internal combustion passenger vehicles sold in California. 2036, the manufacturers of engines and heavy duty trucks have a mandate that they will not sell any more medium heavy duty trucks that are not zero emission. If you look at the California quarterly numbers, I think last quarter, over 26% of all new car sales in California were zero emission. If you look at national numbers, 11% of all car sales across the country were zero emission. So we are seeing that hockey stick curve right now. Obviously, it's not going to be as high as Norway, but we have 300 million people and probably close to that many cars. So it's going to be a step, but we're getting there and we have the mandates in place. So I think we're going to move very quickly in that direction, but it's going to take the costs going down. And part of that is the reprogramming of, I need 400 miles of range, so my battery is going to be $50,000 versus I need 200 miles of range and my car can now be $25,000.
I would just tell you there are some encouraging signs out there too. It's, it kind of goes, the better thing always wins. And to your experience, and I have an electric car too, And I was nervous about range. I work in the industry, and I was like, I felt guilty because I wasn't driving an electric car, so I got one. But I was nervous about it, but it was the best decision I ever made. It's saving me so much money. It's so much more convenient to fuel at home. Or if I fuel at the airport, it's free. I mean, there's a lot of benefit to it. But I would tell you, on the heavy duty side, we're delivering 25 electric school buses in Louisiana in 2 weeks. We've delivered in Georgia. Atlanta Public Schools is making the conversion, and not just Atlanta, the urban areas, but out in Gwinnett County and some other DeKalb County, a bunch of other places that are a little bit outside the city. The movement is happening. Oklahoma was like our biggest market 6 months ago, which, and I've always corrected when I go out there because they have a lot of wind production out there too. And but it is moving beyond kind of those cultural borders, because when I did start, it was all California. We were selling everything was in California and largely in Sacramento. But that is changing, and it's changing very quickly.
Matt, go ahead. Oh, yeah.
So thank you for all the information you guys gave us. I just got a question regarding alternative fuels, just hydrogen. So what do you think is the primary advantage of electric or hydrogen or smart or electric? So what is your opinion on hydrogen?
So SMUD has not picked a winner to say that we are only looking at electric. And actually, we have always kept our finger on the pulse with regards to hydrogen. For those of you that have been in the Sacramento area for a while, you know that we actually had a hydrogen fueling station at the headquarters under the solar carport, funded by DOE and others, BP and others. I would say that as we think about the hydrogen future, there's two things that SMUD looks at from hydrogen standpoint. One is, from a PowerPoint generation fuel standpoint, how do we think about hydrogen? And then the second one is from a transportation fuel standpoint. We think from a cost effectiveness of hydrogen, from our 2030 goals, it's still expensive from a generation fuel standpoint, but we're still keeping our finger on the pulse. We are part of, we've got projects that we proposed as part of the ARCHES work with regards to DOE funding for hydrogen. From a transportation standpoint, we actually think transportation can help drive the market for hydrogen that can bring the price down. We think likely the application for hydrogen is probably best suited right now for those medium and heavy duty, longer range Class 8 trucks that need to have that kind of fueling infrastructure, because a lot of us, have, as mentioned, our commutes are manageable relative to electric. So obviously as an electric utility, we believe that electric is key, but we believe that hydrogen will be part of the future as well.
It's just really quickly, it's interesting. The state of California was awarded, Rachel said, the ARCHES project proposal, $1.2 billion to accelerate a hydrogen hub as part of the larger Department of Energy. And that would create a series of hydrogen refueling stations, mostly for port decarbonization. As Rachel said, the hard part about transportation hydrogen right now is it is expensive comparable to a kilowatt of energy. I think the metric that you fill up with at hydrogen, the last time I checked, was about $25. So for people that were looking at 300 miles of range, it was $125. And that is way off compared to a battery electric car. And also the process of creating hydrogen is still not close to where we want to be, which hopefully ARCHES helps. And I think one of the basis of ARCHES is to create a green hydrogen source. But largely right now it is being trucked in. And so if we think of the greater good of cutting down on emissions, we are just continuing to truck in a fuel source that is being made not in its most beneficial way yet. Europe is very different because of, I think, reliance on nuclear energy and the ability to kind of create hydrogen in a green way off of those kind of nuclear power plants. Sacramento has a lot of interesting pilot project proposals where I think that they're going to do on-site electrolysis at the landfills and some waste stations. So we can see if that will create the large amount of green hydrogen necessary to bring the cost down. And even for medium heavy duty, and we heard this a lot, batteries are getting there. And so what we really want to see is an agnostic competition of who can keep the costs down. Nate could probably talk about this more. A hydrogen class 8 like truck, Nikola made it 500 miles with a full load. The Tesla Semi, also 500 miles with a full load. And so it's going to be up to these fleets now to take the data and take the cost from like the utilities of what it costs to re-energize or repower and kind of make the best case for them.
Yeah, I would say that we need to look at this. I don't want to dilute some of the funding that is coming out to move us towards zero emission, but I think hydrogen is a solution that's going to be a part of the, of what we do. It's not EV versus hydrogen, which one's going to win. It's where's the appropriate place for hydrogen? Where's the appropriate place for EV? With the understanding that that's going to change over time. And one of the real difficult things is this industry is changing very quickly. I look at my parents, they buy a washing machine, they expect it to work for 60 years, and that's just what they bought, where some of the technology is somewhat disposable. And with hydrogen, like Orville said, there's, the long range trucking market seems to be a niche where that makes a lot more sense. Also stationary storage, there's some really interesting generator combined with battery storage that hydrogen can charge those batteries. Because if a traffic pattern changes, or if a distribution center goes out of business and you've just put in a $10 million hydrogen fueling station for trucks, it's a problem. So it's not as movable or malleable as EV at this point, but I do think there's a place for hydrogen in the world.
Question there, and then next.
First of all, on fleets, where you have the fleet pockets, it's a good opportunity to put in canopies, solar PV canopies, in addition to the PV on the roof to cover the need, and then with stationary storage. And to get people to get out of their cars, you might consider elevated group rapid transit, and bicycles, and pedestrian and mobility and miscellaneous mobility devices, and a solar canopy on the top to power the transit. And all of that can be made with the cap column structural geometry and which I need to also. Anyway, get people up and above the street, above the street lights, above the stop signs, so they can bicycle across San Francisco in 20 minutes without any stops. That's it. And that'll get the joy in. The inexpensive cars will be rocking on us to do the hypercar, and so those are looking at that. And nobody's talking about the Inflation Reduction Act subsidy on batteries. All you have to do is make the battery in the United States, and I'm not talking about the Class 8 trucks right now. I'm talking about the vehicles and the medium vehicles. $45 a kilowatt hour subsidy if your raw materials come from North America, the factories in the United States. We're going to do that. And there's also there's in terms of Class A trucks, Amprius, LG Energy, and Cattle all have 500 watt-hour per kilogram batteries. The norm is lithium iron phosphates, 150 to 200, somewhere. The nickel, manganese, cobalt is 300, 350. They're at 500. They're aiming for 700, which is the tipping point to go to full battery electric commercial passenger aircraft, according to the head of SBIR at NASA's Aeronautics Division. So a whole bunch more developments.
Yeah, there's a huge opportunity. We opened a battery factory as well in the province of Quebec. So controlling, our supply chain to our vehicles outside of some of the, typical sources, we had to do that to survive being a new manufacturer. So we are looking at those things and are even looking far into the future at where the critical mineral is going to come from, not just from a mining perspective in North America, to your point, but also through recycling. So, we're trying to look down the road on how are we going to do this. And when the batteries are done in your truck, what's going to happen with that battery afterwards? We'll give them the SMUD for stationary, and then after that, they'll enter recycling, which is now we've just ticked off 30 to 40 years of a battery's useful life. So there's some real opportunities, to your point, in the chips bill as well, of manufacturing domestically for things that are specifically going to support this growth.
For SMUD, you could actually, if you have the study, so you can say, okay, I have this much load demand, and this much is not going to be met there, even if your solar is at 40%, which will be efficient, but we're still going to need this much. So then you plan to be centralized, hub and spoke, centralized solar and battery, what do you call it, terminal, like substation, where you actually generate the extra that's needed to meet their demand. So now you're in a position of managing and supporting them and making the most profitable thing for them.
Yeah, we're actually looking at a model that is not with elevated, corridors or anything like that, but we are actually pairing canopy solar with stationary battery storage, actually to look at resiliency centers at schools. So we just applied for a grant. So fingers crossed, we'll find out in mid-December, working with Twin Rivers School District, which was the first school district to electrify their school bus in our territory. At Grant Union High School, so putting canopy solar in their parking lot, putting stationary battery storage, working with them to be a community hub, right? Which is, in case of emergency, a place to go, enough battery to power their gym and their kitchen, and basically be able to leverage the V2G school bus to also add additional battery storage capacity as needed, but really utilizing that and hoping to replicate that model. We have a letter of support from the Department of State Architect, which, how we think about interconnection of battery storage at public facilities like schools. So these are those types of models that we are looking at, because another piece back to the customer side of things is, we all know we had a bunch of storms in January, right? And it was right around the time that Governor Newsom, made announcements about zero emission vehicles and EVs, and a lot of skepticism came around. How are we going to drive EVs when we've got power outages due to storms? But another piece about these resiliency centers, how do you locate them strategically throughout your community so that there's still access for EVs, for transportation, for emergency vehicles, things like that. So those are the types of things we're thinking about from a community perspective as well, not just on that technology piece about resiliency, but how do we utilize that to serve the community?
One of the other things too is that there are lots of opportunities. I'm going to go back to something that Rachel said. If we can avoid some of the infrastructure costs, one of the things that I know that some folks are looking at are wireless charging. How would it turn this entire industry on its head if you're charging while you're driving, or if you're charging when you park somewhere and you don't have to hook up to a charger? I mean, these are all technologies that people are working on and that entrepreneurs are exploring. So there are lots of great ideas out there, and they're all competing to figure out which one is going to work, and that could resolve part of the battery issue, right? The battery challenge is one that continues to be a formidable one. And sometimes you have to think outside the box. Maybe you don't have centralized fueling like we thought about with our parents, where you go to a gas station, or the previous generation of the internal combustion engine, but you're thinking outside of the box where there's constant charging or frequent charging throughout your trip, where you're not needing even to stop. I mean, we see this with weigh stations. You used to have to stop and weigh a truck. No, now you just drive through. Okay, the technology exists to change. So I want to encourage us to think entrepreneur-like and think that the way that people move in the mobility of the future may be similar in that we have the freedom to as consumers to drive where we want, but the way that we fuel and the way that we do things might be a little different, which could turn the entire industry on its head.
I see what you did with avoiding saying entrepreneurially.
Yeah, you did.
Question, Cameron, are we good on time? Can we keep this conversation? If people are staying, do you guys, Amanda, get questions?
I was just, the last question kind of touched on it, but I was gonna ask, with the landscape changing, you mentioned a lot of mandates, online. The events complete regulations mandating that, heavy duty zero emission. What kind of challenges will we see as we move into that? I know there's charging infrastructure needs that needs to be, addressed, but what else, do you guys need to realize that future?
From what I've been told, this is someone who has advocated for advanced clean fleets and written support letters and talked to the board members. Infrastructure is 1 through 5. It is the basis of a lawsuit to stop advanced clean fleets. And I don't want the onus only to fall like the utilities aren't getting their stuff together. And we've convened over the last 6 months 2 interconnection energization panels that bring about 60 partners to the table, from utilities to fleets to the manufacturers of the vehicles to the kind of charging centers and charging service providers. And there seems to be kind of a universal disconnect on a lot of places. There's problems with permitting. And so how do we get the Governor's Office of Business Development to ease the permitting structure or to help, municipalities that may not have staff that knows how to do permitting? There are guidelines that are very onerous. There are issues, I think, with procuring substations and switchgear, and not all utilities have the same switchgear. How can we make that more uniform so it allows them to kind of buy and consolidate buying power? And where utilities kind of are at a disadvantage is fleets aren't giving them the data. And so how can they power up and provide, the energy necessary, or give you a timeline to get to that energy necessary, right? To say, we can give you 1 megawatt right now, but we could work to 3 megawatts in 5 years if they don't have an understanding of kind of what they're doing. So there's a lot. I think we're not far away from the solutions. There was just some legislation passed that codified a timeline for energization. I think we will start seeing on the investor-owned utilities a push to allow for pre-building, so building out before you know what your need is. But there's also conversations about equity and how much ratepayer increases can happen. If there is any ratepayer increase, you're going to have some opposition. And I think one of the questions that we talked about at our last one, which was really good to actually say out loud, is, are the utilities the right people to do this to begin with? Are we asking them to do something that is so far out of their scope of day-to-day kind of duties that we're just never going to get to where we need to be? And I think that's a question that's worth asking.
I was going to go to, I really appreciate what you mentioned. One thing I was going to add that is slightly different, but is, and maybe you can speak to it actually from a Lion perspective. One of the observations I have is, there is the how do you build the infrastructure and all the challenges associated with that and the permitting and things like that. There's also, as I mentioned, and it's a little bit easier on the light duty, especially if it's consumer, but whether it's managed charging and charging behavior. And this is where I think, opportunities for innovation, what we see is, it goes back to, how do you use this vehicle, right? Do you use it exactly the same way you used to? So school buses used to take kids to school, drop them off, sit in a probably lot, and then go back and pick them up and drop them off, right? But they were sitting for a while. With V2G, maybe they go somewhere and they discharge, but then they need enough electricity to go back and pick up the kids and send them back. I am seeing, we are seeing, especially with medium and heavy duty vehicle electrification, there's energy management software, and then there's fleet management software. And then how do you think about sort of the pairing of the two, of how do you think about you using the vehicle, and how does that dovetail with your fueling of the vehicle, in this case, electricity, and then given maximizing utilization of clean renewable energy to support, that charging and the costs associated with the grid infrastructure and peak utilization and things like that. How do you optimize across that? Do you have the same duty cycle that you always did? How does that impact the number of vehicles you need to have? Does that look different than, okay, I replace 100 buses with another 100 buses? Is that exactly the same? Or maybe it's not. So I see a lot of innovation in that space of what is that fleet management software? And you can speak a little better to this. This is probably just from an observation standpoint relative to that.
Yeah, we recognized that early, that we needed to, and even before EV, like specifically school bus fleets, the GPS and gathering behavior data was already a thing. But now with EV, when a dispatcher assigns a bus, they need to know it's EV, where it's going, what's the state of charge. We're even measuring battery health so we can get in front of the maintenance issues, but it also share that with SMUD so that they know that, what are these vehicles doing on a daily basis. And if Twin Rivers, the one we keep mentioning, if you look at the charging there, and a bunch of it funded by SMUD, it's impressive with high-speed DC charging, but it's all locked up in their fences and is only used for a certain period of the day. So I think one of the interesting things, and I think Twin Rivers is even talking to you about this, is having outside of the fence charging. So school buses can use it, but when that bus is charged, a city transit bus, a truck fleet can come up and fuel with a DC fast charger and throw 100 miles on their range real quick, which is impactful. But I think at a higher level, to address your question, is one of the things we're struggling with right now is there's these generous grants, and the gentleman in the back mentioned the IRA. There are a lot of competing philosophies on how we approach this. So, there is the joint office of the Department of Energy and the Department of Transportation, but on that working group, there's not a single EV manufacturer telling anybody how much and where they're selling these things. The EPA put $5 billion, which is amazing, and we're all over it, but it's a lottery system, and they're focusing on rural areas where, when you're talking about utility, they may not have power at a rural, significant power at a rural bus yard. So we need to get on the same page and figure out, because even $5 billion, when you're looking at nationally, there being almost 500,000 school buses on the road, that only covers a small bit of that. So we need to be strategic with it, so it's not a one-time funding source and then it goes away and everybody goes back to doing what they've always done. We've got to eliminate that snapback. This has to be a permanent change. So, we need to work together on this stuff and figure out where utilities can even service us today. Your counterpart at LADWP a couple of years ago, I said, hey, congratulations, we just sold all these electric trucks and buses in your service area. And the guy just about fell out of his chair. And he's like, well, why'd you sell them there? There's no power there. You should have sold them over here. I'm like, I didn't know that. So, but once you get on the same page, I think that's going to help this accelerate and get over some of these frustrating, slow moving pieces. Is, we have to look, where can we do this now without huge investment, because that can happen. But we also need to have a cohesive strategy, so we're not trying to take care of a community that has no power, but we're going to send a bunch of vehicles there, but there's no utility.
Wait, we have two questions. We have one and two.
Yeah.
Cameron?
Just for time's sake, if people are willing to say this is your opportunity to head out, I would say, but the question, let's continue to ask them, but we are over time. I have nowhere to go. I just wanted to.
Hey, if you have to go somewhere.
If you have to go, just keep the mics on. Don't cut my power. But we have two questions, and then we could come down from this and have more conversation. One and then two.
I'm really glad that some of the conversation around the end of life of these batteries has been a focus, but I kind of want to hear maybe a little bit from all of you, especially as we're dealing with more of the planned obsolescence of a lot of these vehicles, whether they're heavy duty, medium duty, or even e-mobility scooters or bikes, things of that nature. And I just kind of want to maybe hear each of your perspectives, maybe Orville, from your perspective around where you see that taking place over at the CMC, from responsibility for end-of-life products from Lion, maybe where you see kind of the recycling of batteries over there at Spud, and maybe where you see the integration of the recycling of batteries in education, Kayvon?
I feel kind of guilty about this because I started a legislative push last year, Senate Bill 615 by Senator Ben Allen, that would mandate the repurposing, reusing, and eventual recycle of EV traction bills. When I was at CalSTART, we're hoping it gets signed and passed by the governor early this year. But I think it's pretty clear, like for me now as the CEO of the CMC, how do I partner with all three of these people and their organizations and their employees and students to think through Sacramento as a region, our opportunity to kind of almost put a wall around the state, because we know that the lithium ion is going to be in the Imperial Valley. It's going to start getting mined. We know that there are battery companies just down the road. We have Sparks and we have LICAP that are all working on different battery technology. So if we now have legislation that mandates recycling, how does the Mobility Center and other partners throughout the state create that circular economy where we can then keep those resources and the jobs here where we know they're high road jobs in a sense too. So really excited about a lot of the work that's going into that to set the foundation. It's nice that the Energy Commission has a $25 million Power Forward grant they started this year that is designed to recruit and retain battery manufacturing in the state. And I think a lot of it's going to be around recycling and identifying what the critical minerals are that we can use, where we can kind of divert those other materials. And some of the people that I'm talking, what's that next generation of battery technology that is going to allow us to make batteries cheaper, that charge faster, and that have more range.
I'll be brief in my comments. I know we're short of time. I think Orville's right. I mean, the whole circular economy, from an education's perspective, we have a great partnership with Spud because we take their batteries after. So we talked about the mobile source to the stationary source. After that, it comes to the university and we use it as a research and testing. And I see that being an opportunity not only for universities, but for community colleges and high schools and middle schools. We started part of this conversation about an education component. Well, how about taking some of these batteries and putting them in schools so that kids can do some low power, under safety protocol, some experiments and testing. So there's an opportunity there to reuse a lot of these batteries. They don't need to be able to go 300 miles. They need to be able to last 30 minutes for a class or a lab. So I think that's part of the solution too.
I'll be quick as well, because I think a lot of people mentioned what we're doing, but I think there's sort of two vantage points for us. One is how do we partner with entities to really ensure that that circular economy is happening? Actually, one thing from an education standpoint is, I know research is going on and there's been funding for research centers to look at that circular economy. How do you design the battery in the first place to make sure that it can be recycled and you can maximize the utilization of all those materials? So that's been something that, Sac State is a huge opportunity. We've talked to UC Davis, things like that. So those are opportunities there. The other piece I would say is in our procurement and who we partner with. We challenge those that we partner with and those that we procure fund is, what do you have as plans relative to these types of things? So for us, we've been building a lot of some of those kind of criteria into our procurement decisions to ensure that we're working with entities that are being responsible and thinking about that full cycle.
Yeah, it's part of the thinking of, there's a clear separation between, in my opinion, the legacy fossil fuel industry and people that are focused on zero emission. We are looking at recycling now. We need to look at supply chain for critical minerals now and every place that those are going to come from. We also need to provide to the data standpoint. One of the other roadblocks is financial institutions don't know how to lease these vehicles. And a lot of it's based on the useful life of the battery or the guaranteed residual at the end of useful life of the vehicle. So the value of being able to understand the battery and its complete life, from day one being delivered to being recycled. and every step in between. And even refurbishing batteries, there's some more, fragile parts within a battery pack that can be refurbished, even though there's still energy contained, especially in the lithium, that we can just put right back on the road and slow that degrade of range on the vehicle. So we're looking at all of that because of supply chain being such a critical piece to what we're doing. COVID did a number on supply chain, but we're looking, there's only a limited amount. The gentleman mentioned, the way EVs moving in other parts of the country. They're getting battery cells at this point today is not an easy thing to do. So yeah, we're thinking down the road, and I think it's that long range thinking about batteries specifically that really separate the direction legacy fossil fuel companies are going. Yeah, they're going to build a couple hundred or a few thousand vehicles, but they're not retooling factories and truly making the transition. When you look at percentage of manufacturing, where we have 100% EV manufacturing, that's really what is going to push the ideas and really draw on entrepreneurs and educational institutions to help us get to that point where we can stabilize what's the useful life of a battery, and also what do we do with it at its different phases in life. And I think we're far along. We're working with Argonne National Lab as well, not only on recycling, but V2G, pulling the battery out, racking it, putting it in a university's power system to power the buildings. There's a lot of things that are moving very quickly, because it also helps lower the price when there's a useful life beyond that.
Okay, final question. Mike Snow, local entrepreneur, that is interested in finding solutions. And he beat me to my question on recycling that I've been asking in every single room in regards to this topic. And so even going further on that topic, because I appreciate, Nick, what you brought up about onshoring these jobs, because right now with the warranty work on just, the kid toy lithium batteries and all these other, we're sinking ships going overseas because lithium and saltwater don't mix. And so that brings up the topic on safety, as we, which I found interesting, not considering revamping our grid system. So I want to learn more about that perspective, because that's new to me. And because if we're going to have battery packs, what's the safety on both commercial and residential? What's the safety on storage? Are we looking at, on the education side, patented models on how to properly store batteries? And is that something I could work on now? You can have me go play fetch and come back and deliver some ideas for you. Not in addition, the conversion of existing fleet of vehicles. So our existing buses and everything, hybrid Priuses that the city uses, that the county uses. What are we doing on conversions? What are we doing on deconstruction of those batteries? Just a simple deconstruction plant with the waste center here locally be something we use as a viable R&D, or even at the Army Depot with Sava charter schools, well, to get even that younger generation involved before they come to Sac State, and we create that pipeline as well. Are those things that you guys are considering, or something of interest at all? I'm asking. I come from a logistics background in the military, so that's why I'm all about connecting these dots.
No, I got it. Okay. Yeah, just to address the battery safety piece, I was speaking to a group, actually they were investors, and it's, and I'm not trying to trivialize battery safety. It's very critical. It's a new thing. We need to understand it. It's very important. Very hard to put out a lithium fire if there is a thermal event like that. Yeah, it's a fire. Right? It's called thermal event. But if that happens, but everybody's going to go outside. Those of you that didn't raise your hand about electric vehicles, and you're going to get in a gas can full of flammable fluid. Everybody in their pocket has a lithium-ion battery, and unless you own one of those Samsungs or whatever it was a while ago that would catch on fire, I'm going to jump on a plane that's basically a tin can full of explosive material. Again, it goes back to education. We need to understand, what we're comfortable with now, and then looking at batteries. It's a much safer thing. Again, I'm not trivializing safety, but it's going to be, as the chemistry changes, as more people use these, entrepreneurs are going to need to come up with ways to stay on top of these things and keep people comfortable, because it only takes a few bad instances to, really slow or even stop, in some instances, this necessary change if something bad happens. And we need to be able to, regulate people that are just throwing any chemistry out there, and then those that are really taking their time to develop technology that is going to work for the long term. Because there are a lot of retrofitters out there that are just taking some packaged overseas thing, throwing it in a vehicle and making it fit. And, and that's not the way to go, in my opinion. So, I think as this develops, there's going to be a lot of business opportunities. Onshoring, doing it locally. It's already happening with charging hardware, people keeping uptime, keeping those safe, keeping them, as vandalism proof as they can. So they're,
componentry,
yeah,
where they're sourced.
opportunities are endless there.
It's funny. Every time I would do public fairs and see a clip of like a Tesla on fire and be like, oh shit. Because no one's doing the same thing for any other car on fire, right? Like it's anything that happens to internal combustion engines, like happens probably at a greater rate. Data supports that than what's happening in our EV system. And even I think about this with autonomous vehicles. They're like, oh, they ran into someone. I was like, well, let me tell you about my intersection when I'm trying to walk my dogs down the street.
See my mother driving.
Yeah. A lot of batteries now with Romeo power. What we are seeing is a very fast changing industry that goes through some hiccups, and success isn't linear. There are ups and downs on it. What's exciting, especially for those of you that are entrepreneurs, is I've already had 2 people in my 2 weeks as CEO show me different patented ideas for providing essentially covers for EV batteries that take the oxygen out of it. And one is like being invested in by Tim Draper and his group. And I was like, oh, how much do these cost? They're like, not a lot. And when I think about it as like, yeah, right. I'm like, oh, for $2,500, you could be an investor. So I think about it in terms of what is the easiest thing to scale. We should think through this about, can you do this for all EVs? Yeah. Can you do this for electric e-assist bikes and scooters? Because we have seen where there are components that do cause large apartment fires. And I think what happens is every one of those micro-mobility and e-mobility fires that happens in a large scale apartment in like a historically underfunded community then cause regulators to overcompensate for it. Be like, well, you can't put your e-bike in your house. And then they're like, well, where am I going to put it? That doesn't get stolen. And now I can't get to where I need to be. So, it's that give and take where we know that there are issues in the process. We have to stop regulators and elected officials from coming down too hard on it and let the innovators innovate. And then also to your point of like, how do we get more of this? Like I'm talking to everybody about how do we set up with Kevon and Smud, like the cycle that starts in elementary school to train people on the jobs that are going to be for connecting or making the next battery or maintaining an electric school bus, things like that. Nate and I used to talk about this all the time of we want the parents of the kids that are riding in the electric school bus to know how to work on it and fix it and build it. Yeah. How do we start that cycle? So it does take investment. And I think money solves everything for most of this, is that if we have a large scale investment for me to set up a gigantic, research and development, prototyping and testing facility, then the supply chain ecosystem will build itself around that because they know that there is, companies and venture capital and innovators that are coming in to do their work so they could sell their wares. What we also have to do with that is create that workforce development pipeline so that when those companies are looking to relocate or set up shop, they know that if they pick Sacramento, that there are enough people who are trained or able to be trained up very quickly that they can, set up a successful business.
And that, ladies and gentlemen, is why Orville is the new CEO of the California Mobility Center.
I think we are done with questions, but we will stay and mingle for a little bit. And, thank you, Cameron, and thank you to the Carlson Center for obliging us with this.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, thank you. I apologize.
Really like what you said. That really stuck with me.
Thank you. Great job.